Ok, perfecto. Buenas tardes a todos. Gracias por venir, ¿verdad? Viernes a las 4 de la tarde, antes de nuestro receso de Acción de Gracias. Hoy es el último taller de esta serie de talleres de Understanding the NIH Funding Process, que el proyecto HSI-STEM de la División Académica de Ciencias y Tecnología de la Universidad Ana Jiménez Recinto de Carolina está siendo anfitrión. Y ahora, ¿verdad?, los queremos dejar con el doctor Luis Cubano y la doctora Don Morales, que son los que están coordinando estos talleres y han hecho todo esto posible para que distintos program officers de los institutos nacionales de la salud nos puedan traer esta información valiosa. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming over on a Friday at 4 p.m. in Puerto Rico, 3 p.m. in the Eastern Time. This is the last seminar or workshop of this series of Understanding the NIH Funding Process.
Submitting the NIH application today?
Yes, today is the
3 to 4 p.m.
Yes. So yeah, today is the last one that is submitting the NIH application for this series of Understanding the NIH Funding Process. So we would like to start. So I'm just gonna leave you with Dr. Luis Cubanos and Dr. Don Morales, who are coordinating this effort. Thank you.
Can you guys see the slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So once again, please make sure that you register in the link that is on the slide. And welcome to the Understanding the NIH Funding Process, our last session. And once again, I want to remind you that if you need the slides from today, please send me an email, luis.cubano@nih.gov, and I'll send you the slides. And I want to thank everybody that has participated in this process through the 5 weeks that we have been doing this. And also feel free to contact any of them if you have questions that are specific to their institutes or their programs or anything in general, and they'll be able to refer you to somebody else if they cannot help you. And with that, we're going to go ahead and start it. And I'll pass it on to John.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Luis. And hello to everybody. I'm so glad to be back with you guys. My name is Joan Grieve. I am from the National Institute of Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering, NIBIB. And this is one of the institutes and centers that focuses actually on engineering the future of health. So if I may, shout out to any engineers out there. And I hope that what I'll be able to tell you about today is 3 of our R25 mechanisms. And R25 mechanisms are actually focused on research education. I'm going to primarily focus on ESTEEMED because I believe that was one of the requests from this wonderful group that we've had the chance to interact with. And so after I go through each small set of slides for these 3 mechanisms, I'm going to pause to take some questions. If I don't know the answer, I'll take my questions back with me and I'll be able to provide you the answers through Luis. And then I also want to ask my colleagues that if there's anything that I've made unclear or something that you would like to call out that might be similar in your IC, I would definitely welcome that. So the first one that we're going to talk about, if we could go ahead and advance the slide, is the Enhancing Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math Educational Diversity, or ESTEEMED. And the first thing that I want to point out is that my fearless leader who leads our division, Dr. Zainab Aram, she's the director of the Division of Interdisciplinary Training. She actually developed this one, invented this one, took it all the way through to a funding mechanism. And she is one of our strongest, actually, pardon me, she leads our diversity within NIBIB and has been a real champion across the engineering space as well as NIH. So ESTEEMED is to support educational activities that enhance the diversity of the biomedical research workforce through early preparation for undergraduate students in STEM fields. I don't know about you guys, but when I was in my engineering undergrad, I got steamrolled my freshman and sophomore years. It's really challenging. And so we're trying to set up a support network in that space to recruit a diverse group of students and then also support them in a manner that retains them through their juniors and senior years. Typically, participants in ESTEEMED will likely be interested in going on to do graduate work and also have a biomedical research career. ESTEEMED needs to happen at institutions that have an active honors program where junior and senior students can actually apply to it. I wanted to pull up some of our next dates, which occur in 2021. You'll see that in May, we ask for letters of intent. These are not required, nor are they binding, but I really want to encourage you guys, like I think Luis and Don and all of my colleagues have, is start talking to us and interacting with us. And a letter of intent is one way to do so. Then the application will be due in June. And some of the links that I have here are to the FOA, the funding opportunity announcement itself, PAR 20-223, as well as frequently asked questions. So if we can go to the next slide, Luis, I will tell you about the components of ESTEEMED. There is a summer bridge program, which is at least 5 weeks, and this is a boot camp that happens prior to the freshman year in college to help the ESTEEMED students come in, get adjusted to being at a college, and then also helps to start introducing them to all the topics that we need as engineers, some math, some physics, etc. Then there are continuing academic year activities, and this emphasizes the basic sciences, computer science, communication. It helps participants maximize their academic performance, maybe by getting together and studying in groups, and then also as well as prepare them for the summer research experiences. So the summer research experience is a minimum of 8 weeks on or off campus, and it should conclude with an oral presentation and a written report of some sort. This could happen at a small internal conference to the university. It could happen at a group meeting where multiple labs get together, etc. So those are 3 of the components. And then we also, because this is about education, strong mentoring for the students. I've mentioned the honors program already, and then also a strong evaluation plan about how the students are doing once they have been recruited into the ESTEEMED program. So if we can go to the next slide, Luis. So when I had the honor of teaching my engineering students, I usually tried to teach them in 3 ways: words, diagrams, and then equations. So words were on the first slide, but this is a diagram of they come in the summer before freshman year and get together for at least 5 weeks. There are continuing activities throughout the freshman year. In the summer year, the freshmen that have just completed their first year might actually help mentor the new incoming group of ESTEEMED students. They then continue with activities through their sophomore year. They're expected to have a summer research experience after their sophomore year. And then in junior and senior year, they have the opportunity to go into an honors program and then hopefully on to graduate school. If we can go to the next slide, please, Luis. And so to give you a little bit more of a feel for what occurs in some of the strong applications that we've seen. So the first thing is that the applications need to involve areas of STEM with relevance to NIBIB, and that will be through engineering related either departments or tracks or a critical mass of faculty with background in taking engineering concepts and applying them to biomedical problems. As many of you know, especially if you're as old as I am, a lot of biomedical engineering departments have come out of MECI or Chemi or EE, and that is allowed as long as there is a concentration and track and group of faculty who really do have a focus and expertise in the biomedical application. Now, depending on the size and the resources of the institution, typically we would envision maybe 4 to 8 participants per year. And when you write your application, you want to give a clear sense of how you're going to admit the students and also retain them, what retention criteria. And as an example is, all of us have a hard time adjusting when we first go off to college. And if we're an underrepresented group coming into engineering, which I remember my first mechanical engineering class, I was one of 5 women out of 40 people, and that still surprised me. Sometimes we have an even more challenging time adapting. And so the retention criteria can include things that if students' first step into this doesn't go perfectly, how is the program there to support them and allow some, quote, failure modes and not just, you know, get rid of the student, but how are we going to help them to continue successfully? And then the last 3 bullet points also emphasize that there are salaries available to the student participants through this. And they are during the summer bridge program, the academic year activities, and then also the summer research program. And so since it's a salary, there is expected work in exchange. And so some of the work that can be done actually is to facilitate the students' learning. So for example, sometimes if you have an excellent student in engineering who has amazing drawing abilities, sometimes I've seen students be asked to draw a beautiful free body diagram that can then be used by the rest of the class when you're solving certain problems. There's a lot of online class bulletin boards, and students could be tasked with helping to manage and curate those. So to give you some examples there, if we can go to the next slide, Louise. And some other things that you want to include in a strong application is that you can highlight how the esteemed program would interact with other programs at your institution. But when you do this, it's about leveraging interactions with those other programs, not duplicating them. And so how would esteemed interact with that program to really amplify the esteemed experience, because we still want to see that the esteemed students themselves are going to have a unique identity and community. I've mentioned the honors program a couple times. I do want to emphasize there are letters of support that are required. These will indicate institutional commitment to the program, and then letters from the directors of any existing summer bridge programs or other programs on campus that might exist, including the honors program. And finally, I also want to emphasize is that although partnering with other institutions is not required, if you happen to be at a smaller institution or those without necessarily active research labs or very many of them, if you can find partnerships at other universities to maximize the research opportunities for participants, that's welcomed. And you would just want to highlight how that partnership has been formed or will be formed, who will be involved, how will it be governed, and how will it be strengthened throughout the years. And so the last thing that I want to highlight for this particular mechanism, but it goes for all the funding opportunity announcements, FOAs, is that section 5 in an FOA, I think on all of them, is called the application review information. And so that is another place that you can look in the document to see what are the criteria that we consider to be, that should be included and clear in the strongest applications. So with that, I'm going to pause here. And I don't know if we can take any questions live, or conversely, I would welcome any of my colleagues at NIH to add anything here.
So I was told that the host institution has civil engineering, electrical engineering, and computer engineering, mechanical engineering, and industrial engineering accredited by ABET.
Oh, okay, in all ABET accredited?
Yes.
Yep, okay. That sounds great. And again, I would emphasize that although you don't have to have a department per se, if there are tracks focused on biomedical applications or a critical mass of faculty that can say, absolutely, I am focused on mechanical engineering as applied to bone, cardiovascular, tumor biology, whatever it is, biomaterials, and can develop an esteemed program around biomedical applications, those are the strongest that's what's strong. Any other comments? Okay.
I don't, well, yeah, I don't see anything else in the chat, or nobody has raised their hand.
That sounds great. I tell you what, let's go on to the second one then, please. And so the second one is actually one that I have the honor of managing. This is team-based design in biomedical engineering education. And so we can go to the next slide, Luis. Again, many engineers are going to know this, that in undergraduate education now, there's actually a senior design component. And this is amazing because this didn't exist back in the day. And so through coursework, so what this R25 is about is to establish new or to enhance existing undergraduate team-based design courses in biomedical engineering departments or programs. And so this is it's centered around the capstone design experience that many juniors and seniors have, but it can also be about developing other courses that support that. And so typically this is addressing open-ended biomedical design projects, totally team-based. There's a focus on clinical immersion, so the students may be able to go out into the clinic and shadow doctors or nurses or other healthcare providers. There's an emphasis on translation, which could cover IP issues or regulatory science. How do you get things through the FDA? And then also we like to see if a university has an opportunity to also really highlight the educational opportunity to implement and evaluate and disseminate whatever they're doing. That is also helpful. And so if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, Luis. And what's exciting about the team-based design, which is a grant, that can help you and your students actually participate and compete in one of NIH's challenges. And this is a design challenge. It's called Design by Biomedical Undergraduate Teams. And it's about a challenge of undergraduate student teams to develop technology solutions to unmet needs in an area of healthcare. And maybe I have some animation here. Luis, can you go ahead and go forward? Oh, there we go. So to give you a sense of this is that in 2020, we had 86 applications from 46 universities, 20 states, a total of 410 students engaged. And you can see all of the prizes on the right-hand side. Some are sponsored by NIBIB. Again, Zainab Aram, the head of my division, actually led the design and implementation of all of this and has been recruiting across to other ICs. We have HIV now involved. We have healthcare technologies for low resource settings in the National Institute for Minority Health. And then most recently, we are collaborating with NCI, which is the National Cancer Institute. And so we want to encourage you all to think about this because we think that you and your students could absolutely be competitive in this amazing challenge. So if we can go to the next slide, Luis. And I tell you what, I'll talk about the last one and then take questions because I apologize. I think I might be running just a little bit long. So last but not least, a third R25 that we have is the Summer Research Education Experience, or PAR 19-197. And if we can go to the next slide, Luis. And again, this one happens to be headed up by my fearless leader, Dr. Zainab Aram. And this one's interesting because this R25 has multiple institutes and centers on it. NIBIB happens to be one of them, and each of us uses it for a very different reason. So for us, NIBIB will support applications focusing on summer research experiences broadly in the areas of biomedical imaging, bioengineering, or health informatics. And NIBIB will support programs for high school science teachers and community college faculty from STEM-related departments, not for the students. And so what this one is about, it's about actually partnering a high school or community college faculty member with someone at a research university and bringing them in for a summer experience that actually facilitates new curriculum development for that high school or community college faculty member to then take that knowledge and different ways of presenting it back to their high school classroom to inspire the next generation of high school students to go into STEM in college. And with that, I will pause. This is the end of my section, but I'd be happy to take either other questions or comments.
Preguntas, questions? You can type them in or you can say something.
Okay, then what I will say to all of you is thank you so much for this honor of being able to interact with you. I've deeply enjoyed it, and I want to say thank you tremendously to Luis and Dawn.
Well, we have a question. Patrick?
Yeah, just one question for is it Joanne or Joan? How many do you accept multiple applications from institutions or only one application per institution?
Typically on all of these, the esteemed and the team-based, one application per institution. I am uncertain about the summer research education experience. I would need to check on that.
Anybody else? If not, just go ahead and send an email if you have any questions later.
Sounds great. Thank you.
And next we'll go to Mike.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Humble. I'm a program administrator at the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. I wanted to take a little bit of time at the beginning of my presentation here to talk about who we are at the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, the type of research that we do, and then I will follow up Joan's presentation by talking about some of the R25 programs that we support. So the NIEHS is one of the NIH institutes. Our mission is to, as it says on the slide, to discover how the environment affects people in order to promote healthier lives. Basically, what we do is we do research on how one's environment impacts your health. This could be, the air we breathe, the water that we cook with or drink, those types of environments, and how does that impact our health? In that regard, NIEHS is a little bit unique within the NIH institutes in that really the research focus we have is to identify things that impact human health. If we can figure out how stuff in our environment affects our health, perhaps we can reduce our exposure to those types of things, improving health on the front end, and really making an impact that way, rather than sort of diagnosing and treating diseases once they happen. Ideally, we can sort of prevent those diseases from happening. Another unique aspect of NIEHS is that of the 27 institutes and centers that make up the NIH, we are not located in the Bethesda, Maryland area. We're actually located in the Research Triangle Park, Raleigh-Durham, Chapel Hill area of North Carolina. It's a long story on how we ended up down here that I won't bore you with, but this is a picture of our building. It's really a lovely location. One of the things that I often have to explain to people when they contact me with ideas, people will share an idea and say, well, I've got this idea. I'd like to do some research on how human activities are impacting the environment. That's how they see the environmental health. Humans are messing up the water. That's impacting the fish or the air, the birds, things like that. But I have to explain to people that what we're interested in is not how humans are messing up the environment, but how that messed up environment comes back and impacts humans. So I think about like the college I went to, they have a very strong environmental science program, but they're looking at just that thing. It's human impact on the environment. Again, our focus is on really human health aspects. Next slide, please. So what do we think about in terms of our environment? What types of things? As I said, things in the water are of interest to us. This could be industrial pollutants. It could be metals like mercury or lead or arsenic, things that we know can impact health. It could be the air we breathe, whether it's outdoor air pollution from living near factories or maybe automobile exhaust. Could also be indoor air pollution. We know around the world that there's a lot of indoor cooking that goes on. You see pictures where the mother is cooking inside the house by burning things in a fireplace or over a pit, and the house is just filled with smoke. And those types of indoor air pollutants can impact health as well. It's pesticides, it's all sorts of different types of chemical exposures, but it's not just chemicals. We also look at like climate change is becoming more and more important, and nutrition and time in combination with a variety of different types of things. So that's what we think about when we think about environmental health. We know that we're exposed to all sorts of other stuff in the environment, like infectious agents and pathogens. Big concern these days are infectious agents in our environment. But exposures to infectious agents and pathogens actually falls under the mission of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, NIAID, Tony Fauci's institute. So those types of things fall outside of what we do, even though they might come from your environment. We're often associated with toxicology because a lot of the things that we are doing are toxicology type experiments. Why does this particular chemical cause harm? But there are certain types of toxicants, again, that fall outside of what we do. I often, not often, sometimes get contact with someone who wants to look at some of the toxic chemicals in cigarette smoke, for example. But typically, we don't support research on cigarette smoke or alcohol or drugs, whether they are recreational or pharmaceutical. Those types of exposures are basically voluntary. You've chosen to smoke or to drink or to do drugs, or they've been prescribed. But those types of exposures are considered voluntary rather than environmental. Environmental are things that, because of where you live, this is your water supply, this is the air you breathe, things you have less control over. Secondhand smoke, you don't necessarily have control over that. There's something now called third-hand smoke, where all the cigarette smoke chemicals are settling down on your couch, for example. You might sit on the couch and get exposed to things. Anyway, that's a little bit about what we do as an institute and the types of things in the environment that we're interested in. Next slide, please. We're also exposed to these different types of environmental exposures throughout our entire lives, from the time that we were born all the way through in later life. And these exposures have different impacts depending on when we are exposed to them. We certainly can think about the impact of things like lead on childhood development and neurocognition and things like that. But we also are very interested in exposures that happen in utero. So a mother, her environment, the air she breathes, the water she's exposed to, can actually impact a developing fetus. These impacts might not necessarily mean, genetic mutations and things like that. It might be a more subtle change in methylation patterns on the genes that result in their downregulation or upregulation that ultimately alters biological processes and tweaks them in such a way that actually can impact life later. I oversee our immunotoxicology research. We know that in utero exposures can impact immune development. You count the white blood cells, they look normal, but it turns out they're just not as effective as fighting off infectious agents. So we know that there are these in utero impacts. So we've had a program called The Fetal Basis of Adult Disease, where exposures at the fetal stage can actually have an impact later in life. So again, just to wrap up who we are, we explore lots of different exposures, lots of different health endpoints, and really exposures across the entire lifespan. So next slide, please. So I want to follow up what Joan talked about with some of the R25 programs that we support. Joan started talking about PAR 19-197, which is the NIH Summer Research Education Experience Program. The purpose of this program is really to provide high quality research experiences really during the summer academic break for high school students, college students, or teachers or faculty. As Joan mentioned, there are a number of institutes that are participating in this. I've shown them on the slide here. The applications for this particular program are due, there's one receipt date per year. It's typically in the middle of March. We have another due date coming up March 17th. The programs that are proposed for this particular funding announcement need to fit within one of the missions and interests of one of the participating institutes. If a proposal comes in just sort of talking about, general STEM research experiences, that's probably not going to be an accepted application. It really needs to focus on one of the participating institutes and within what they would do. So a project going to the National Institute of Neurological Diseases and Stroke should have as a research focus research opportunities to look at neurological diseases and things like that. As Joan mentioned, NIBIB's program focuses on teachers and faculty. So not only do you need to look at the science that the Institute supports, but also there are nuances in terms of who is of interest to be supported in these programs. Next slide, please. So at NIEHS, the programs that we support just need to have a focus on environmental health science research, as I had defined earlier. The participants in our programs can include high school students, undergraduates, or science teachers. We've had some programs that have come in that have been a mix. So some programs that have come in for like high school students and undergraduates. Just sort of as a word of caution, many of those programs found that that just was a difficult combination to actually do. Some of the lecture types of things or seminars, if they aim them towards the high school students and what they know, the undergraduates were just bored. If they aim them at a little higher level of scientific level to really interest the undergraduates, the high school students were lost. And so turned out to be, you know, easier for them to focus on high school students or undergraduates. So just kind of mention that. NIEHS really sees these R25 programs sort of a key activity within our strategic plan. Was really to try and increase the pipeline of students and people going into the environmental health sciences and becoming environmental health science researchers. So the thought is that if we can introduce environmental health to high school students and undergraduates, maybe they'll get interested in this. And I know Joan talked a little bit about her training. I'd never heard of environmental health science when I was in high school. I liked science. I was pretty cool. Decided to go into that in college. In college, too, I never heard anything about really environmental health. I did have an organic professor who warned us that a lot of the chemicals we were creating or working with in the lab were very bad for us. And I thought that was really interesting. Not in a creepy kind of way, but just kind of set in mind that, oh, this stuff is bad for you. And it's kind of tweaked my interest in environmental health, but as a field, I really didn't know that this existed. So that's sort of our hope with these R25 programs, that will introduce these younger people to environmental health, and maybe they will choose that. Likewise, as Joan mentioned, if the science teachers understand what environmental health is, they can bring that science back into their regular classroom activities. Joan went through a lot of the nuances of what goes into an R25 application. I won't go over those again, but a lot of what goes into an R25 needs to go into these R25 summer programs as well. In NIEHS, we have 13 active R25 summer programs that will grow a little bit here. We're getting ready to make some new awards. I'm in the process of doing the paperwork on that now. All of these programs require a recruitment plan to enhance diversity, and so that is an important component that needs to be included in the applications. It's not a requirement that the programs be solely focused on underrepresented participants. However, you can do that if you'd like. 6 of our 13 programs are focused solely on participants who are underrepresented in the biomedical research field. Currently, our programs support about 130 participants per year, and it's a mix. We have some programs that are high school, but most of our students are undergraduates. We have one program focused strictly on teachers. Next slide, please. We have another R25 program. This is a different funding announcement. This is an RFA called our Undergraduate Research Education Program, or our UP program, to enhance diversity in environmental health sciences. This also uses an R25 program. It's a research education opportunity. What's different about this program based on the previous program is that this one is focused solely on undergraduates, and specifically at the junior and senior level of college, and the participants really need to come from the underrepresented categories. We had an original RFA back in 2014. We put that out again 5 years later, and we just this past summer made the awards for the applicants for this pool. We went from 6 programs to 9 now in this particular program. Next slide, please. What makes this program different, in addition to the diversity requirement for the participants, is that this program supports students not just 40 hours per week during the summers, but also will enable the participants to work with their mentors to keep involved in their lab during the academic year and get paid for that time. We put up to 15 hours per week. Most students aren't really able to spend that much time during the academic year in the lab, but however much time they can be compensated for that. It keeps that connection with the lab so that when they come back for a second summer, they hit the ground ready to go. So the students can be supported for up to 2 years. Like the other R25 program, we do expect these programs to have not just an experience for these students to be working in the lab, but also some sort of an educational program, maybe a collection of seminars or something like that, to really show the breadth of what environmental health is, that the students don't think it's just that one project that they're working on. Basically, what we want any of our R25 programs, and I'm sure Joan's program would be the same, is that if I were to show up on campus and ask one of these students, what program are you in? I would love to hear them say, I'm in the environmental health science program, and this is the type of research I'm going on. And rather than just, I'm in the summer research program here at my university. A lot of the programs do build off other opportunities for summer projects that are going on, and that's terrific. But we would like to see a sense of identity for this program so that the students participating have that sense that, I'm in this group doing environmental health science. Next slide, please. Okay, this is basically my last slide. Wanted to just show where these programs are. So these are basically all of our institutional training programs, the T32s and the R25s. So the T32 programs in blue, the blue circles, are the pre- and postdoctoral training programs that we support. So we have about 50 of those across the country. The green circles are the R25 summer programs from PAR 19-197. You can see many of them are associated with our blue dots, the training programs, and really the PIs on those programs sort of see the R25 summer program as a way again to inspire students to go into environmental health. And gee, if you really like this, we have a training program that can support you as a pre-doctoral student. So many of the programs are paired up in that way. It's not obviously not a requirement, but it is an option. But again, likewise, some of them aren't associated with those big universities, and that's just fine. And the pink dots, the pinky purple color dots, are the diversity R25 up programs. Again, you'll see many of those are associated with our training programs. Again, these are universities with a strong base of environmental health science. We realize that not all the research in environmental science comes from NIEHS, and that's fine with us. We just want to see the science that the students are doing is environmental health and nature, regardless of where the funding comes from. So next slide. Those are a bit of our R25 programs. This is my contact information. As I'm sure you've heard all along in this series, we're here from the government and we are here to help. So if you have questions, feel free to contact me. The reason I kept that second program in there, even though the funding opportunity is now passed, I do get contacted by people who will say, this is really interested in this program. It's too bad I missed it. And I can say, well, we have this summer program, and I've been able to steer people towards applying towards that. So that's a little bit about NIEHS and some of our R25 programs, and I am happy to answer any questions now or through email.
Any questions? If not, feel free to contact Mike through email. And I'll go ahead. Mike, thanks for participating today.
Thank you.
Anissa, please go ahead.
So greetings. Happy Friday. Good afternoon. My name is Anissa Brown. I am one of the program directors for the NIGMS Undergraduate Research Training Initiative for Student Enhancement. So this program previously was an R25. It was an R25 that included both an undergraduate and graduate component that has been split into two programs. And the undergraduate component is a T34 and the graduate component is a T32. And as you can imagine, the graduate component is called GRISE. But for the sake of the conversation today, what I'm going to do is focus on the URISE program. And so I have a bunch of slides here. I've pulled out some information that I'd like to emphasize from the funding opportunity announcement. And I want to highlight some of those critical components that are important for a successful application. So Luis, what I'm going to do, and hopefully it is not too disruptive, I'm going to start with the intro slides. And then what I'm going to ask you to do is we're just going to jump to the tips and tricks and talking about some of the potential pitfalls. And then if we have time and after we get questions, I'll go back through and go through the details of the different components of the application. And so I hope these slides will be available to people. As the other presenters have mentioned, I am also a government worker. It is my duty, it is my pleasure to answer any questions, and I am almost sure that all of my colleagues would agree, and you will have my contact information, emails for others that are affiliated with the program that you can reach out to with any questions. So with that, I'll move to the next slide. And just so we're all on the same page, I believe most of you all are familiar with the URISE program. The URISE program is one of the NIGMS's diversity enhancing program. So the focus is on undergraduates. These are undergraduates that meet the NIH definition of diversity. And the purpose of the program is to provide the students with the skills for a successful transition into a PhD program. So that can be a PhD or an MD PhD. And here I have the RISE program website. And so on this website, you can also access the URISE and also the GRISE program. So next slide, please. So this goes for any application that you're submitting to NIH and possibly any other agency. First and foremost, I cannot stress it more than enough to read the funding opportunity announcement, read the notices, look at the application guide multiple times. I always say back when things were more paper and pencil, if you don't have coffee stains on it, you probably haven't read it enough. But now that most things are electronic, you should have a number of highlights and additional text. And at the different stages in which you're developing your application, you're then referencing back to the funding opportunity announcement. I think, as Joan mentioned, Section 5 of almost all funding opportunity announcements include the review criteria. I always encourage applicants to look at this criteria, again, at multiple stages in which you're developing the application, and use that as a checklist to identify if you've included those critical components that the reviewers are expecting to read within your application. Next slide, please. So before we actually talk about what makes a successful application, the most important thing is to make sure that you're applying for a program that you are eligible for. So what is the eligible criteria for the URISE program? When we talk about institutions, so Patrick asked the question, how many applications can come from the program or programs that Joan mentioned? For URISE, there is only one application allowed per institution. Now, we also have an undergraduate diversity enhancing program called Maximizing Access to Research Careers. This program is typically at research, well, actually, it is only allowed at research intensive institutions. It may be at research active institutions because it was in place prior to the transition. So it's important to know it may not be applicable to your institution, but only one undergraduate diversity enhancing program is allowed at a institution at a time. The applying institution is expected to award baccalaureate degrees in biomedical sciences. So again, this is focused on biomedical research training. And so those students that participate in the program should be majoring in anything related to STEM. Again, URISE is for what NIGMS has defined as research active institutions. So these are institutions that have less than 7.5 million total costs over the past 3 years in NIH funding. If you are an institution that has greater than 7.5 million, it doesn't mean that you can't participate in our undergraduate diversity enhancing programs. It just means that you wouldn't be eligible for URISE. You should be considering the MARC program. Next slide, please. So now that we've talked about the eligibility for institution, what is the eligibility for a program director or program investigator or a co-PI of an application. So there is an expectation that a person would have full-time appointment at the applicant institution. Multiple PIs or PDs are encouraged. Now, as I mentioned, URISE is a diversity enhancing program. The expectation is that you're engaging undergraduate students that meet diverse categories. When you think about and you start to develop or assemble your leadership team, you should keep that in mind, that you should be developing a team that is also representative of the diverse categories. Also, it should be diverse in the talent and the expertise that is brought to the program. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, that we encourage the multiple PDs and PIs. A principal investigator, they should have administrative and training experience. They should have the ability to provide strong leadership, direction, management, and administration of the training program. They should have demonstrated commitment to training the next generation of biomedical research workforce. And again, I want to continue to emphasize, this is a diversity enhancing program, so there should be some experience working with individuals that represent diverse categories. And it's important that the application describes the administrative structure and leadership succession plan for critical positions. Next slide, please. So we've talked about the eligibility of the institution. We've talked about the eligibility criteria for the principal investigator. What is the eligibility criteria for the undergraduates that would participate in the program that would be considered trainees? So they have to be a citizen, a non-citizen national, or permanent resident of the U.S. It is very important that they matriculate as a full-time student at the applicant institution. So a lot of these programs, sometimes R25s and other training mechanisms maybe allow you to engage students from other institutions. The URISE program only allows you to engage trainees that are full-time students at the institution. Now, the URISE allows for 1 to 3 years of support. What we like to see is that students are participating in the program at a minimum of 12 months, but typically what we like to see at least 2 years of involvement with the program. Now, moving to the next slide. When you develop your application and you are talking about the number of positions, you're talking about recruitment and retention, you have to provide a strong justification for the number of trainees that you want to engage in your program. And so you have to describe the pool of individuals that could potentially participate in that program. For new programs, typically we say 4 to 6. For large programs, that could be, or renewal programs, people that have existing training programs sponsored by the NIGMS, they could have up to 35 slots. But it is very important that you convince the reviewers that you have a pool of individuals that you can recruit from to fill whatever slots that you've requested within your application. And you'll find when you read through the funding opportunity announcement is that whatever you're proposing in your application, it should be adequately justified. When you talk about the trainees, the position, the recruitment, and the retention, you want to also talk about how will you review or how will you select these individuals? How will you holistically look at them? What will be the review process? And so it's very important that you go into details, not only of what the pool is or how you may recruit them. You always also want to go into detail of how you will select these individuals. You also want to define and justify the selection and reappointment criteria. So I mentioned that you can have students can receive 1 to 3 years of support. Typically, we like to see that students have a minimum of years of support. Now, a student could participate in the program. It could be an automatic that they would roll into a second year, or it could be that everybody has to re-interview for their slot. It's important that you describe this in your application. And so again, I think in a previous presentation, there was a mention of designing a feedback team. And so I always encourage applicants to have someone read your application that may not be closely involved in the program or the development of the program, and see if they're actually able to envision what you expect that the program will be. And so sometimes you write, those that are very closely involved in a program, they will write an application, and a lot of details are assumed. And these are critical details for a reviewer to determine that this is a successful program that meets the goals of the program, of the expectations of what the purpose of the program is supposed to be. So before we actually move to the next slide, Louise, what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask for questions, but if we can actually move to slide 27. So while Louise is taking us to slide 27, are there any questions thus far?
Tell me when to stop because my numbers are not the same as yours.
Okay, so you can go to the common pitfall slide. And I do realize that we're probably providing you with a lot of information. Again, my contact information is in this slide set. You can always send questions through Louise. I am happy to reach out to you to respond to your questions by email. If we need to set up a conversation, a Zoom meeting, a phone chat to go into more details about your question that may be more related to your institution, I am more than willing to do that. So I'm going to go through some common pitfalls and some formatting tips, and then we can go back into, if there's time, some of the details or expectations of the application. So what are some of the common pitfalls? So I think I've stressed enough the importance of reading the funding opportunity announcement and any notices that are associated with the funding opportunity announcement. And you will see those associated notices in the funding opportunity announcement. And again, I think it was stressed earlier, it's very important. Please do not hesitate to reach out to the program officer with any questions that you may have in regards to the application. We are here to serve you as much as we can. We can't write your application for you, but we are more than willing to answer any questions that you may have. Additional common pitfalls are some of the specific aims don't align with an institutional assessment and resources. So it's very important that you do a self-assessment of the needs of your institution and the students that will be participating in your program, and that you develop a program that is responsive to the outcomes of that assessment. And you develop aims that are aligned with whatever the outcomes of that assessment and the details of your program. So it's very important that the information in your application is consistent. And that also goes for data. So it's very important, this program and your application requires you to submit quite a bit of data that you will put in tables, and you may also put in the narrative. It's very important that that information is consistent. Other pitfalls, the proposed project lacks novelty and innovation. So novelty and innovation doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be new. It has to be sexy. You could be using some of the things, the components of a typical training program, but how you administer them, how do you tailor them to be responsive to the students that you will be engaging is what we're looking for when we talk about novelty and innovation. The other thing is incomplete or complete tables that don't align with that assessment or the proposed project. So I've talked about this. Again, this application requires NIH data training tables, and it also it provides some suggested tables to provide the data. So a really good application could take you 6 months or more to actually develop it. The next deadline for this application is May the 21st. You may not be ready next year, but it's important that you start thinking about it, even if you're planning to submit in 2022. Another pitfall is failure to state program challenges and strategies to address them. So this application isn't about always tell us all about the greatest things that you can do as if everything is perfect and everything works well. The reviewers recognize it, NIH recognizes that things don't always go as we plan. We're scientists, we know this. And so be very upfront about potential challenges and state how you may address those in the case that you encounter those challenges. Next slide, please. So some of the formatting tips. Again, always check your application. Submit your application early enough so if there is an issue, you can resolve that issue before the deadline approaches. Now, when you submit your application or when your Office of Sponsored Research Program submits your application, they may get warning signs. And so that's an opportunity for you to rectify it before it is officially accepted by the NIH and it has the potential to be withdrawn. It's also very important that you adhere to all page limits. Only provide the material that is requested within the page limit that is provided. Please, please, please do not overstuff sections to overcome different page limits or within the appendix. The application could be withdrawn and it can be very frustrating to the reviewer. So I always tell applicants, you do not want to frustrate the reviewer or you do not want the review discussion to be focused on something that is minor and takes away from actually focusing on some of the very good elements you may have in your program. Now for appendices, it should only be used in circumstances covered in the NIH policy on appendix materials and as the FOA specifically instructs. This is a very critical component in which applications can be withdrawn if it has the incorrect information here. Next slide. Again, read the program announcement. I cannot stress that even more. It's also important that you present the institutional framework and the environment of your program. So this goes back to the self-assessment. You don't want to develop a program that's based on an institution that you're not at that may have different needs. And this takes me to be realistic in your program goals. Set the goals that are relevant to what your baseline situation is, not necessarily the national average and not necessarily the research intensive institution that may be close to you. Next slide, please. Make sure you address all the requirements of the program announcement. Sometimes I say just do a typical Control F. What is everything that says must, that says required? Make a list of those things and make sure you include those things. It's very important that you talk about how the program works. Make sure all roles and responsibilities are clearly defined and distinct. You don't want the reviewers to have to make assumptions about the details and to incorrectly make assumptions. Next slide, please. Be clear. Again, don't bury important information. Don't expect the reviewers to read in between the lines. When you present the data, don't exaggerate it, don't hide the data. The reviewers will do the math. They will make sure what's in the table is also presented and then it matches the details that's presented in the narrative. And again, as stated here, it is far better to present results as they are and address how the program aims to improve. Next slide, please. Now, with the URISE program, it is an expectation that you will have faculty mentors. We do understand research active institutions may not have a lot of faculty that can provide one-on-one mentorship to their students. So there is the opportunity that you can partner with other research intensive or other research active institutions to increase the research resources available to the students that you would like to engage in the program. You do have to provide a biosketch for all faculty members that will be participating in the program. It is important that that biosketch shows the experience of that faculty mentor, not only their research experience, but their experience and track record in mentoring students, their commitment to biomedical research training, and their commitment to actually enhancing diversity amongst the biomedical research workforce. You want to make sure that you provide data on current and prior students. So you may not have a training program at your institution, but you may have a similar program that has some of the same goals and objectives that you're proposing with the URISE program. You can use that information to inform, again, how you design your program plan and to justify that information. And then this just talks about consistency, but I think we've touched on that quite a bit already. Next slide, please. And so I think the next couple of slides just have some resources available for you. If you just go to the contact list, which is probably 2 slides ahead. And so again, it has my contact information, Edgardo Falcon Morales. So he is my counterpart. We actually co-direct the URISE program. Justin Rosenzweig is on grants management. If you have any questions regarding budget, those questions should be directed to him. And Tracy and Lee Slice are part of the scientific review team. If you have any questions in regards to review, then you should contact them. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. I will do my best. What I will do is I can reach out. If I can't answer the question, I will reach out to an individual. I will get the answer, or I will make the connection between you and the person that can respond to your question. So I know we are probably over time. I will take any questions. If you will have the slides as you go through the slides, and as you are thinking about developing an application, any questions that you may have, please feel free to reach out to me. So with that, are there any questions? And Luis and Dawn, if there's anything in particular that you would like for me maybe to go back and emphasize for the components of the application, I can do that. I just do recognize it is Friday and many of our guests are looking at 5 p.m. and not 4 p.m. So
we're going to go ahead. Somebody had a question? We'll go ahead, Selena. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Selena?
I think I'm going to cover this slide for Selena.
Okay.
Selena, if you're here, please interrupt if I have stepped forward inappropriately. Otherwise, I'll cover it for you. When you're writing up the project narrative, you want to open up with a very crisp, fairly brief statement of the purpose of the project, which is what would happen if you did the research and it was successful. And the aims are a very critical foundational part of the application that follows the purpose. The classic choice are 3. You don't have to have 3 aims. There's nowhere in any NIH document that says that you have to have 3. You can have 2, you can have 4, you can, specific aims are relatively conceptual. They're usually proposed on a construct level, on a theoretical level, and activities from that go throughout the narrative should carry the purpose through the aims in a very sort of logical kind of a way. You definitely want to, as so many people have repeated so many times, clearly identify the key language in the FOA that really outlines what NIH is looking for, and make sure that you clearly identify how your project is answering that request. And then, of course, I myself am still a paper and pencil person for some things. And this is one of those, at some point with these kinds of things, I inevitably get a big piece of paper and either tape it to the wall or pin it on a cork board, or I get out a whiteboard and I just write out the aims, the activities, and the timeline. And I just sort of roughly sketch out the budget. And that's really, there's a whole like sort of a diagram that you can build that can be very helpful. And then, of course, you want to make sure your project narrative follows the FOA instructions in structure and in length. When you read over the FOA, make sure you look at the additional considerations and look through carefully and make sure that you are getting everything that they want you to address in your application. Next slide, please. So I'd like to welcome today a new presenter for our workshop, LaTarsha Carruthers. She is a scientific review officer at the National Institute of Dental and Craniofacial Research. Welcome, LaTarsha.
Thank you.
You are welcome. We have one slide here with just a little more detail about the review process here at NIH. Reviewers consider each of the 5 review criteria on the left when they determine scientific and technical merit, and they give a separate score for each one, ranging from 1, which is the best, to 9. They also give an overall impact score, also from 1 to 9, which should reflect their personal integration of the scores on each review criteria, as well as their overall assessment of the potential impact of the proposed science. An application doesn't have to be strong in all the categories, since, for example, a project might not be all that innovative, but is really needed to advance the field and close a gap. So these are the review criteria for evaluating research applications, also usually referred to as RPGs. However, training announcements as well as specific FOAs can have different or additional special review criteria, which will be described in the FOA. LaTarsha, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Dawn. So here we've listed the individual scored review criteria that Dawn mentioned that we generally see for research project grants on the left of the slide. They are significance, investigator, innovation, approach, and environment. All reviewers on the panel are important to you because each reviewer gets 1 vote. But in order to succeed in peer review, you must first win over the assigned reviewers. Those are the reviewers who read your entire application before the panel meets, and then they guide the review panel's discussion of your application. So now let's look at the writing tips on the right-hand side of the slide. It's important to be realistic in the scope of your project. Do not propose more work than can be reasonably done during the proposed project period. On the other hand, make sure that you propose enough work to justify the budget. Also, make sure that the key personnel have the appropriate expertise and background to successfully conduct the proposed work, and that their expertise is clearly stated in the application. Make sure to write and organize your application so that the primary reviewer can readily grasp and explain what you're proposing. Reviewers often have several other applications that they were assigned to and that they must read. So the easier your application is to read, the easier it is for a reviewer to advocate for your application. It's very common to hear the assigned reviewer tabbing through the application or flipping through the pages as other panel members ask questions. So organizing your application carefully so that the right information can be located quickly is very important. Also, some reviewers will be closer to you in scientific or programmatic background, while others will be further away. And that's why it's very important to express your ideas and plans as clearly as possible. Appeal to the reviewers and the funding ICs by using language that stresses the significance of your proposed work. This is a really good time to be enthusiastic and committed about your research and sell your ideas. Also, edit your application meticulously. Read over your own application and score it yourself using the criteria on the left-hand side of the slide, But also you should refer to Section 5 of the corresponding funding opportunity announcement to find all of the review criteria and considerations. As Don mentioned, each FOA can have different review criteria and considerations. Some of these criteria are scored while others are not, but they can all factor into whether your application is funded. Consider sharing these review criteria with your external readers before you submit, and ask them to rate your application when they review it for you. Thank you. That's all I have.
I muted myself. Now I have to talk some more. So Luis, back to you.
So I want to thank everybody for coming in today, and once again remind you to fill out the evaluation. As you know, this was the pilot project and we want to improve the activity. And if you need the slides, make sure to send me an email, luis.cubano@nih.gov, and have a happy weekend and a great Thanksgiving. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you very much.
So much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.